Flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet, a Boeing 737 faces a critical failure. Two skilled pilots announce their inability to rescue the plane through the intercom system. However, everything shifts when two F-22 fighter aircraft pick up a famous call sign, Viper 9, transmitted by a teenage girl sitting in seat 14C. She represents their sole chance for survival. Please share your location in the comments before viewing the complete narrative. Remember to subscribe for additional incredible tales. The Boeing 737 moved effortlessly through the clear morning atmosphere at 35,000 feet above the Rocky Mountain range. Maya Castellano, age 15, occupied seat 14C wearing white earbuds connected to her smartphone. Her attire consisted of well-worn jeans, old Converse shoes, and a loose-fitting hoodie, with her dark hair gathered in a casual ponytail. To all aboard, she appeared completely ordinary, simply another young person flying without adult supervision. A flight attendant approached her row using that particular voice adults use with minors traveling alone. "Everything all right, sweetheart? May I bring you something?" Maya responded with a courteous smile. "No, thank you, I'm fine." The man in business attire seated in 14B observed her briefly while working on his computer, likely assuming she was shuttling between separated parents' residences or heading to some educational program. Nobody realized that Maya Castellano possessed the call sign Viper 9 within military aviation records spanning 4 family generations of combat aviators. Her great-grandfather had piloted P-51 Mustang aircraft with the distinguished Tuskegee Airmen Squadron. Her grandfather had commanded F-4 Phantom jets during the Vietnam conflict, receiving a Distinguished Flying Cross Medal. Her mother, Major Sarah Castellano, operated F-35 Lightning aircraft from Nellis Air Force Base. Her father, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Castellano, had served as a Top Gun training instructor before a practice mission accident sent his plane into the Pacific Ocean 3 years prior. His last radio transmission, Viper 9 descending. Maya had inherited this prestigious call sign through proven ability. At age 13, she achieved the 98th percentile on spatial reasoning evaluations. At 14, she successfully coached her uncle through recovering his aircraft from a dangerous stall during a flying lesson. By 15, she had internalized more hands-on aviation expertise than many commercial pilots acquire throughout their professional lives. This knowledge came not from structured training, but through constant exposure, maturing in ready rooms and briefing areas, drifting to sleep while listening to conversations about energy management and tactical geometry. When her mother's squadron leader observed Maya precisely explain a theoretical combat situation, he simply acknowledged it with a nod. "Viper 9 it shall be." The initial sign that something was catastrophically failing appeared as a subtle vibration that most passengers overlooked. Maya detected it instantly, an abnormal harmonic frequency within the aircraft structure that shouldn't be present. She removed one earbud and focused her hearing. The engine's acoustic signature had altered its pitch. Looking through her window, she noticed a faint vapor stream from the right wing, indicating hydraulic fluid leaking. Her mind started piecing together the puzzle with accuracy. Inside the cockpit, Captain David Morrison and First Officer Jennifer Walsh faced a warning situation about to become disastrously worse. The master caution indicator lit up, succeeded by multiple system warnings that made little sense. They had experienced hydraulic pressure loss in 2 out of 3 systems at once, which shouldn't be achievable. The flight control computer displayed error messages indicating impossible conditions. Morrison, with 23 years of flying experience, had encountered nothing comparable to this situation. Walsh started executing emergency protocols, but each procedure either failed or worsened the situation. Seattle Center, United 2847, announcing an emergency. Morrison's voice maintained professional composure. though Maya detected underlying stress. Multiple system malfunctions, cause unknown, requesting priority assistance and closest appropriate airport. The radio reply crackled through cabin speakers, now active because of electrical problems. United 2847, acknowledge your emergency. Closest facility is Billings, Montana, direction 095, distance 112 nautical miles. The circumstances worsened with alarming rapidity. The main flight display went black, then blinked, displaying impossible information. The autopilot disconnected. The aircraft initiated an uncontrolled roll that Morrison fixed with control inputs that felt sluggish and non-responsive. Hydraulic fluid levels were declining across all systems. The vibration Maya had sensed intensified, signaling something fundamentally compromised with structural stability. "Jenny, we must descend immediately," Morrison stated, anxiety penetrating his professional demeanor. "This aircraft is disintegrating." They tried to isolate hydraulic malfunctions, but isolation valves weren't functioning. They attempted to restart flight control computers, but systems refused to activate. The aircraft was failing around them in manners that contradicted training and expertise. 20 minutes into the crisis, descending past 31,000 feet because they could no longer sustain level flight, Captain Morrison reached the decision that would characterize the following 8 minutes. He pressed the intercom button. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I must be truthful about our circumstances." The cabin became silent. "We are experiencing numerous critical system breakdowns we cannot fix. Both First Officer Walsh and myself have tried every available procedure. We have lost functional control of the airplane. I wish I could tell you we can repair this, but that would be dishonest. I apologize. We've attempted everything within our knowledge and it proves insufficient. Please utilize the remaining time to reach out to family members. I'm genuinely sorry." The cabin exploded with emotion. Passengers wailed, wept, grabbed their phones. Flight attendants attempted maintaining composure while recognizing it was pointless. The businessman in 14B wept into his phone. The woman seated across cried in Spanish. Young children sobbed. It represented the sound of 217 individuals facing approaching death. Maya remained completely motionless amid the pandemonium, her mind accelerating into that crystalline state her mother described as combat time, where moments elongate and decades of inherited expertise organize into tactical answers. The pilots weren't incorrect. By standard understanding, the circumstances were impossible to resolve. However, Maya didn't analyze situations through commercial aviation perspectives. She reasoned in combat aviation terms, where impossible scenarios were routine occurrences, and pilots operated aircraft actively attempting to destroy them, yet still returned home safely. She recalled her grandfather's accounts of landing F-4 Phantom jets without hydraulic systems. She remembered her father's instruction regarding creative problem-solving when all systems collapse. Most significantly, she considered call signs and heritage, and the understanding that when your designation is Viper, surrender isn't acceptable. She retrieved her phone and opened an application civilians didn't know existed, a military family emergency communication network. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, inputting the code that would alert her location and call sign to military aircraft in the vicinity. It violated protocols, but her mother had been explicit. If you're ever in circumstances where people will perish and you can assist, utilize it. I'll manage the repercussions. At Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, 2 F-22 Raptors conducting routine training exercises received an alert that made both aviators react with surprise. "Raptor 21, are you observing this?" Major Jake Amer Rodriguez activated his radio. "That's a Viper call sign from a civilian aircraft at 32,000 feet, 60 miles southeast." His wingman, Captain Lisa Blade Chin, accessed details. "Hammer, that's Viper 9, as in the Viper 9, Marcus Castellano's daughter." Within the fighter community, certain call signs were mythical. Viper 1 through Viper 8 symbolized 4 generations of superiority. Viper 9 was intended to represent the next generation, a teenager who wasn't expected to pilot anything hazardous for another 10 years. "She's aboard United 2847, Blade continued. "Multiple system breakdowns. Flight crew announced circumstances unsolvable. They're descending." Hammer reached a determination that would either result in commendation or court-martial. Raptor flight transitioning to tactical mode. United 2847, this is Air Force Raptor 21. We are 2 F-22s currently positioned northeast, approaching to provide assistance. Be informed we have verification that Viper 9 is traveling on your aircraft. Request you establish contact with that passenger right away. The cockpit reply was bewildered and frantic. Raptor 21, we don't comprehend. Viper 9 is a military designation. We don't have military personnel aboard, only civilians. Unless you can physically pilot this aircraft, there's nothing anybody can accomplish. Hammer's reply was pressing. United 2847, examine your passenger list for Castellano, likely a teenager flying unaccompanied. Get her to a cabin telephone immediately. That is a direct order from the United States Air Force. That young person might be the sole reason any of you survive the next 10 minutes. The flight attendant gazed at Maya with wide, confused eyes as the message transmitted from the cockpit. Maya was already unfastening her seatbelt, advancing through chaos with fluid efficiency. She retrieved the cabin phone, her voice shifting into a register that astonished adults within hearing distance. Calm, professional, conveying authority mismatched with her age. Viper 9 on frequency. Raptor flight. Verify your 2 F-22s currently northeast approaching. Hammer replied instantly. Viper 9, Raptor 21. Verify 2 ship currently 12 minutes away. Your mother is going to be furious with me for this, but we require your observation and analysis. What's your evaluation? Maya closed her eyes and allowed 4 generations of expertise to flow through her awareness. Raptor flight, Viper 9, based on vibration patterns, uncontrolled roll behavior, hydraulic failure sequence, and electrical irregularities. My assessment is catastrophic tail section, structural compromise, possibly bird strike or drone collision that damaged fuselage and triggered cascading malfunctions. The aircraft interprets multiple system failures because structural sensors are providing impossible information due to frame distortion. Pilots are troubleshooting phantom problems while the actual issue is the vertical stabilizer connection structure is collapsing. She paused. The answer isn't contained in any commercial procedure manual because commercial protocols assume structural soundness. We need to stabilize using asymmetric thrust control and differential roll commands to offset vertical instability from tail damage. Operate it like a damaged fighter, not a malfunctioning airliner. In the cockpit, Morrison and Walsh stared at each other in astonishment as they listened to a 15-year-old diagnose their failure with accuracy, surpassing their combined expertise. "Who is this young person?" Walsh whispered. Morrison activated the intercom. "Miss, with all due respect, we're managing a catastrophic crisis. We don't have time for—" Hammer's voice interrupted, firm and definitive. "Captain, I strongly recommend you remain silent and pay attention. That young person is Viper 9. Her great-grandfather flew with the Tuskegee Airmen. Her grandfather possesses a distinguished flying cross from Vietnam. Her mother is among the premier F-35 pilots in the Air Force. Her father was a Top Gun instructor who perished saving his student 3 years ago. She's been absorbing combat aviation expertise since infancy. She just identified your structural failure from the passenger cabin using inherited instinct and observation. You already acknowledged you cannot save your aircraft. Allow her to attempt it." Maya began guiding commercial pilots through procedures never intended for civilian aircraft, but representing accumulated knowledge of pilots who'd mastered flying damaged aircraft through pure determination. Captain Morrison, stop conceptualizing this as a commercial airliner with failed systems. Start conceptualizing it as a damaged fighter still capable of controlled flight if you abandon conventional methods. First, cease attempting to use autopilot and automated systems. They're receiving corrupted information and worsening things. Transition to full manual control for both pilots. Physical awareness exclusively. Second, hydraulic failures are secondary symptoms. Stop troubleshooting them and accept they're compromised. Third, your primary control is engine thrust differential. Establish asymmetric thrust control. Left engine at 70%, right engine varying between 60 and 80% to manage yaw. Use throttles like a helicopter utilizes tail rotor, constantly adjusting to sustain directional control. Blades F-22 closed within visual distance, operating external cameras over the damaged airliner. Viper 9, Raptor 22, verify your assessment is correct. Visual on substantial structural damage to vertical stabilizer connection points. The tail is flexing in manners absolutely not designed to happen. The fuselage is being held together by determination and composite materials. Also observing hydraulic fluid streaming from numerous locations. How did you identify this from inside the cabin? Maya's reply was factual. The vibration pattern matched accounts my grandfather shared about returning damaged phantoms home from North Vietnam. Identical harmonic frequency when the tail is attempting to separate. Once you recognize what it sounds like, you don't forget. Raptor flight, I need you to guide Morrison and Walsh through this. Because they're confined to commercial procedures, they need to reason like fighter pilots. Hammer began instructing Morrison through the impossible maneuver of operating a disintegrating airliner like a damaged combat aircraft. Captain Morrison, pay attention to Viper 9 and me. You're not landing this aircraft conventionally. That's impossible. The tail won't survive normal landing forces. Instead, you're executing what we term tactical emergency recovery. You're going to crash this aircraft in the most controlled manner achievable. You're not targeting a runway. You're targeting the flattest terrain available and setting it down, gear retracted, at minimum controllable airspeed, using asymmetric thrust to sustain directional control until impact. It's going to be violent and frightening, but survivable if you execute exactly what we instruct you. Maya cross-referenced terrain maps, her mind computing approach angles with intuitive mathematics. Viper 9 to cockpit. Recommend emergency landing location at coordinates. I'm transmitting now. Dry lake bed in Wyoming, 28 miles southwest. 8,000 feet of flat, hard-packed surface. Raptor flight, can you provide navigation? Blade was already computing. Affirmative, Viper 9, United 2847. Execute right turn, heading 220. Commence descent to flight level 255. Maintain descent rate 1,000 feet per minute. We'll guide you down. Morrison's hands trembled as he initiated the turn, sensing the aircraft respond in manners that contradicted every instinct. The asymmetric thrust method Maya recommended was actually functioning. Differential power providing yaw stability, the damaged tail could no longer deliver. Walsh was weeping while maintaining flawless execution. I cannot believe we're receiving aviation guidance from a high school student. Maya's reply carried significance that eliminated every doubt. You're not receiving guidance from a high school student. You're receiving guidance from 4 generations of pilots who refuse to allow impossible circumstances to kill them. My great-grandfather flew his Mustang home with 3 cylinders destroyed. My grandfather landed his Phantom using engine thrust after losing all hydraulics over Hanoi. My father saved his student by directing his dying Hornet into the ocean so his wingman could eject safely. I'm a Viper, Captain. We don't surrender, and we don't allow our aircraft to quit while people are relying on them. Now pilot your airplane and save your passengers. The descent was controlled pandemonium. Every second, a negotiation between physics, damaged systems, and human determination. Morrison and Walsh flew with accuracy they didn't realize they possessed, guided by a teenager in the cabin and 2 fighter pilots on their wings. The F-22s had become their eyes, announcing altitude, airspeed, attitude modifications, providing navigation and corrections commercial instruments could no longer dependably supply. Maya stood in the forward galley, phone against her ear, announcing observations that saved lives with every statement. You're developing slight left roll tendency. Compensate with right engine increased to 73%. Vibration amplitude increasing. Recommend reducing descent rate to 1,200 feet per minute to decrease structural loads. Nose attitude is good, but you need 3 degrees more right rudder trim. You're performing excellently, Captain. You're piloting this aircraft exactly right. My father would be proud of both of you. The passengers had ceased screaming and started observing the teenager who transformed from anonymous high schooler into their sole hope. The businessman in 14B gazed at her with wonder, attempting to reconcile the girl listening to music an hour earlier with the aviation specialist saving 200 lives. Flight attendants followed Maya's occasional instructions. Secure this, prepare that, check these passengers. All delivered with matter-of-fact authority. United 2847, Raptor 21. You are 15 miles from touchdown point. Descent profile is good. Maintain current power settings. Viper 9, how are the passengers? Maya glanced back at the cabin, observing fear, but also hope. Raptor flight Viper 9, cabin is secured, passengers are prepared, cockpit, recommend you make an announcement, something positive. Morrison activated the intercom, his voice unsteady but now carrying hope instead of resignation. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier I informed you we were out of options. I was mistaken. We've received assistance from 2 Air Force F-22 pilots and from a passenger who possesses military aviation expertise far exceeding anything I've encountered. We are attempting an emergency landing on a dry lake bed in Wyoming. It will not be gentle, but it will be survivable. Follow all flight attendant instructions, assume brace position on my command, and trust that we're being guided by the absolute finest expertise available. We're going to make it. The approach was the longest 8 minutes of Morrison's life. Every second a test of skill, courage, and trust. Hammer guided him through power settings and attitude adjustments with patience and urgency. Blade provided constant external verification. 5 miles out, descent rate 1,000, speed 190, looking good, Captain. Reduce power to 65% both engines. 3 miles. Continue descent, you're on profile. Viper 9 final check. Maya's voice carried the same calm her father's had maintained until his final transmission. Cabin secured, passengers braced, aircraft configured for emergency landing. Crew is performing flawlessly. Bring her home, Captain. The impact was violent but survivable. The 737 touchdown gear retracted on the hard-packed lakebed at 140 knots, the belly grinding against earth with a sound like tearing metal and thunder. Dirt and debris exploded as the aircraft slid across the ancient lakebed, momentum bleeding away through friction and controlled desperation. Morrison and Walsh held controls with white-knuckled determination, using asymmetric thrust to keep the aircraft tracking straight, preventing the yaw that would have sent them tumbling to kill everyone. The tail section, held together by little more than composite fibers and stubborn engineering, flexed dangerously but held. The fuselage remained intact. After 31 seconds that felt like 31 years, United Flight 2847 came to rest in a cloud of dust in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, damaged and scarred but still containing 217 living souls. Emergency slides deployed and passengers evacuated with organized chaos. Morrison and Walsh sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on controls. Walsh spoke first. "David, what just occurred?" Morrison could only shake his head. "I think a teenage girl just rescued us all by knowing more about flying broken aircraft than we learned in entire careers. I think we just received a lesson in humility from someone young enough to be our daughter." Maya stood on the lakebed, dust settling, watching the F-22s make a low pass overhead. Hammer and Blade rocked their wings in traditional salute between pilots who'd shared something profound. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her mother. "Just heard what happened. Proud of you, Viper 9. But we're having a very long conversation about when to use emergency protocols. Also grounded until you're 40. Call me immediately." Maya smiled, wiping tears she hadn't realized she was crying, feeling the weight of her call sign and legacy. Captain Morrison found her standing alone, still appearing like a teenager despite having just executed aviation procedures most professional pilots couldn't comprehend. He stopped a few feet away, searching for adequate words. Finally, he simply said, "Thank you. I apologize. I gave up. I apologize. I told my passengers we were going to die. I apologize. I didn't trust that there might be someone with knowledge exceeding mine, and I apologize. I initially dismissed you because of your age. You saved every life on that aircraft." Maya turned to face him, and Morrison saw in her eyes something ancient and profound, accumulated wisdom of 4 generations of pilots who'd learned that aviation was ultimately about refusing to accept defeat. "Captain, you didn't give up. You declared honestly when you'd reached the limits of your knowledge. That took courage. And you listened when unconventional help arrived. That took even more courage. Most pilots cannot accept assistance from outside their experience base, especially from a young person. You did. That's why everyone survived. You flew that broken aircraft exactly right once you had the framework to understand it differently. You saved your passengers, sir. We just helped you see how." 3 weeks later, Maya sat in a conference room at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., surrounded by officials simultaneously trying to commend her and determine what regulations she'd violated. Her mother sat beside her in uniform, protective and proud. The administrator, a former Navy pilot who'd flown with Maya's grandfather in Vietnam, looked at her with exasperation and admiration. "Miss Castellano, you understand what you did was irregular," he began carefully. "You accessed military communication systems without authorization. You provided aviation consultation without proper credentials. You inserted yourself into an emergency situation, violating numerous protocols." He paused. "You also saved 217 lives using knowledge and expertise that most professional aviators don't possess. You correctly diagnosed a structural failure that baffled experienced pilots. You coordinated with military assets to execute an emergency landing that will be studied in aviation schools for decades, all while maintaining composure that would be remarkable in an experienced pilot, let alone a 15-year-old civilian passenger." He leaned back. "So we have a problem. We need to acknowledge regulations exist for good reasons, while also acknowledging those regulations didn't anticipate someone like you. What do you think we should do?" Maya met his gaze with the directness her father had taught her. "Sir, I think you should create a formal protocol for aviation family members with demonstrated expertise to serve as emergency consultants when circumstances warrant it. Not just me. There are dozens of young people from military aviation families who've absorbed professional-level knowledge through exposure. There are retired pilots who could provide consultation. There are engineers who understand aircraft systems at levels exceeding operational pilots. Aviation is safer when we use all available expertise, not just people we've officially credentialed. She paused. Flight 2847 is evidence that knowledge doesn't respect age or credentials. It respects preparation, experience, and courage to apply understanding when it matters. Yes, I violated regulations, but those regulations assumed teenage passengers couldn't contribute to emergency resolution. That assumption was incorrect. Maybe the regulations need updating. The administrator smiled. You sound exactly like your father. He once told me regulations should serve safety, not the other way around, and any rule preventing smart people from helping in emergencies needed reconsideration. He glanced at other officials. Here's what we're doing. Officially, you'll receive a letter of reprimand for accessing systems without authorization. Unofficially, that letter will be accompanied by a commendation for exceptional performance during an aviation emergency, placed in your permanent record with a notation that you possess expert-level aviation knowledge. Additionally, we're creating the consultation protocol you described, and you're helping us design it. We're calling it the Castellano Protocol, and it's going to formalize how we access non-traditional expertise during emergencies. Her mother squeezed her hand under the table, pride radiating. Maya felt the weight of her call sign settling more firmly. Understanding Viper 9 came with responsibilities extending beyond emergency interventions. She'd become a bridge between traditional aviation hierarchy and the reality that expertise could develop in unexpected places. 6 months after the emergency landing, Maya sat in high school physics class, half listening to a lecture about forces and motion that seemed comically simplistic compared to three-dimensional vector calculations she'd executed while talking down a dying aircraft. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Morrison. Just wanted you to know Jennifer and I are both back flying. We've completed additional training on emergency procedures, including techniques you taught us. We're different pilots now. Better because we understand there's always more to learn and help can come from unexpected sources. Thank you for saving our lives and careers. If you ever need anything, call us. Your family now. Maya smiled and sent back, "Fly safe, Captain. Clear skies." That weekend, she visited her grandfather at his home in Virginia, finding him in his study surrounded by photographs, medals, and memories stretching back to when aviation was young and dangerous in different ways. "Tell me about it," he said simply, and Maya spent 3 hours walking through every detail of Flight 2847 while he listened with complete attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather case. Inside was a simple pin, wings with a lightning bolt, handmade and worn with age. This was your great-grandfather's from before official insignia existed. He made it himself from a piece of his Mustang after his first mission over Germany. He said he wanted something to remind him he'd survived impossible circumstances and could do it again. He gave it to me before my first deployment to Vietnam. I gave it to your father before his first carrier qualification. He was going to give it to you when you earned your wings, but he ran out of time. His voice was steady, but weighted with grief. You've earned it now, Maya. You've proven you understand what it means to be a Viper, not the glory or recognition, but the responsibility to use your knowledge and courage when people need it most, even when it's dangerous, even when it violates regulations, even when nobody expects someone like you to have the expertise required. Maya held the pin carefully, feeling the weight of 4 generations of aviation excellence and sacrifice, understanding she was holding more than metal. She was holding a promise made across decades that knowledge would be passed down, that courage would be maintained, that the next generation would honor the previous by refusing to let impossible circumstances win. Grandfather, what if I can't live up to this? What if Flight 2847 was just luck, and I'm not actually capable of being the pilot everyone thinks I should become? He smiled. Your great-grandfather asked me the same question. Your father asked me the same question. Every Viper has doubted themselves because the legacy is heavy and expectations are high, and the fear of disappointing people who sacrificed so much is real. He leaned forward with absolute conviction. But here's what I told all of them and what I'm telling you. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own. That pin doesn't mean you have to become a fighter pilot or military aviator or anything specific. It means you understand that knowledge carries responsibility, that expertise should be used to help others, and that when circumstances demand courage, you don't hide behind age or credentials or fear. You step forward and do what needs doing. That's all. You've already proven you have that quality. Everything else is just choosing what form your contribution takes. Maya pinned it to her jacket, feeling it settle against her heart like it belonged there. They spent the rest of the afternoon looking through old photographs and flight logs, her grandfather telling stories about missions and pilots and aircraft lost to history but living in his memory, passing down oral traditions that couldn't be found in any book. As she drove home, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Hammer. Viper 9 got a question. We're updating our training curriculum for handling civilian aircraft emergencies and want to incorporate techniques you used. Would you be willing to consult on the program? Totally understand if you want to stay focused on high school stuff, but you've got insights that could save lives in future emergencies. She pulled over to consider the request properly, understanding this was another threshold moment. She could politely decline and focus on being a normal teenager, or accept and formally acknowledge that Viper 9 came with ongoing responsibilities that would shape the rest of her life. She thought about her father's final transmission, those calm words, Viper 9 going down, that had exemplified grace under pressure. She thought about Captain Morrison's initial defeat and subsequent courage to accept unconventional help. She thought about her great-grandfather flying through German anti-aircraft fire. She thought about 217 people alive because knowledge had been passed down across generations, and someone had been willing to use it despite regulations suggesting teenagers should remain silent passengers. She thought about the weight of that pin against her heart and what it represented, not glory or recognition, but responsibility and service, and the understanding that expertise demanded contribution. She typed carefully, committing to a path that would define her future. Hammer, Viper 9, I'm honored and I accept. Let's build a program that saves lives by acknowledging aviation expertise exists in unexpected places and emergencies don't respect credentials. When do we start? His response came immediately. Outstanding. Welcome to the team, Viper 9. Your father would be proud. Hell, we're all proud. First meeting is next month at Nellis. We'll coordinate through your mother. Also, you should know your call sign is now in official Air Force documentation as an approved aviation consultant. You're the youngest person ever to hold that status. Don't let it go to your head. You're still responsible for getting good grades and doing your homework. That night, she sat at her desk, staring at her father's photograph on the wall, him in his flight suit, standing in front of his F-18, smiling with easy confidence. She'd been 12 when he died, old enough to understand the loss, but young enough that grief still felt raw 3 years later. Now, staring at his photograph while wearing the pin his great-grandfather had made and carrying the call sign he'd earned, Maya finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her. Aviation wasn't just a profession or passion. It was a commitment to use dangerous knowledge for protective purposes, to master complex systems so others could trust their lives to your expertise, to refuse to accept defeat when people were counting on you. Flight 22847 hadn't been luck or coincidence. It had been the culmination of 15 years of preparation she hadn't realized she was receiving. Every air show and cockpit tour and tactical discussion building toward 8 minutes when inherited knowledge had been the difference between 217 deaths and 217 survivals. The story of Flight 2847 would eventually become an aviation case study taught in military academies and commercial pilot training programs as an example of how unconventional expertise and creative problem-solving could overcome impossible circumstances. Maya's name would remain protected in public versions, but in military aviation circles, Viper 9 became synonymous with courage under pressure and inherited excellence, proving itself when stakes were highest. Years later, when she stood at the Air Force Academy graduation ceremony, earning her wings and commission when she flew her first solo in an F-35, while her mother watched crying with pride when she eventually became an instructor herself, teaching the next generation about emergency procedures and unconventional solutions. She would remember those 8 minutes at 35,000 feet when 2 experienced pilots had given up and a teenage girl with a legendary call sign had refused to let 217 people die simply because circumstances seemed impossible. Because that's what it meant to be Viper 9, not perfection or flawlessness or even exceptional skill necessarily, but the stubborn refusal to accept defeat when knowledge and courage might make the difference, when people were counting on someone, anyone, to have answers conventional wisdom couldn't provide. It was the legacy her great-grandfather had started when he'd flown his damaged Mustang home from Germany despite being told to bail out. It was the tradition her grandfather had maintained when he'd landed his Phantom without hydraulics over Vietnam, despite regulations saying it was impossible. It was the example her father had set when he'd sacrificed himself so his student could survive, proving that service meant more than survival. And it was the promise Maya had made unknowingly every time she'd listened to their stories and absorbed their wisdom and prepared herself for a moment she didn't know was coming, but which arrived exactly when knowledge and courage were required to transform impossible into survivable. The pin rested against her heart. 4 generations of aviation excellence and sacrifice condensed into handmade metal and inherited wisdom. Below it would eventually come her own wings and medals and stories she'd pass down to whoever came after, continuing the tradition of Vipers who refused to let impossible circumstances win when people needed them most. But for now, at 15 years old, wearing faded jeans and an oversized hoodie, sitting in her kitchen with her mother while the evening sun painted everything gold and warm, she was simply Maya, extraordinarily ordinary and ordinarily extraordinary, a teenage girl who'd saved 217 lives and who would spend the rest of her life figuring out what that meant and how to honor it without being defined by it, carrying her call sign and her legacy into whatever future she chose to build. Her mother stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sky that had claimed her husband and nearly claimed her daughter in different ways. "You know what your father told me the day before his last flight?" she said quietly. "He said that every Viper faces a moment where